Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Level Up podcast. I'm your host, Ken Rose, co-founder and CTO at OpsLevel. OpsLevel is an internal developer portal that helps engineering teams quickly ship quality software. Our Level Up podcast explores challenges, best practices, and stories from some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great products, teams, and companies. Today, I am so excited to welcome Emily Freeman to our podcast. Emily is currently head of community at AWS and was previously at Microsoft in senior roles around cloud and operations advocacy. She is a prolific speaker, a connoisseur of hot takes on Twitter, or X, and a best-selling author of 2 books, DevOps for Dummies and 97 Things Every Cloud Engineer Should Know. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's exciting to have you. Why don't we just start? Tell us a little bit about yourself. You've had just a really varied career between Microsoft and AWS, going on the conference circuit, podcast galore, writing multiple books, which I can imagine is a challenge. Just tell us a little bit about what's going on in the world of Emily Freeman.
Oh my goodness. I feel like I don't know. The top of mind is just the shifts in social platforms. And I find myself back on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I will never call it X. So deal with it. But, I feel like we did a tour of other social platforms and I'm kind of back, but although it remains a cesspool, it's where our community is. And I cannot overstate just how remarkable the developer community is at just supporting each other and sharing knowledge and being there as this type of support mechanism, both for us as professionals and as people. So I'm happy to be back and more engaged on my Twitter with hot takes, as you say. I love that. Connoisseur of hot takes. I'm putting that in my bio.
Nice. Yeah, I remember when, kind of the Twitter and X and the changes that were going on, because Twitter definitely, when I think of there's DevOps Twitter and there's platform engineering Twitter, and those are the spaces I hang out a lot in. And, there was kind of that community, those communities were somewhat at risk at some point. A lot of people left for Mastodon. There was this fragmentation. So I think things are mostly stabilizing now that, okay, Twitter or X or whatever we're going to call it isn't going away. There's still people on the platform. Because LinkedIn is also a very different kind of focus, I find. Like platform engineering LinkedIn is it's there. It's different in terms of the focus.
It is, and I struggle. I don't know if it's my age group or where I am in my career. I thought LinkedIn was a sort of dinosaur that was eventually falling over, but then there was this surge, and it's actually a thriving community right now, which is really interesting. I should pay more attention to LinkedIn, but I don't. So that's on my.
It is. I find there's different types of takes though. It's okay. There's the people who it's the curation of their professional career. Every time something good happens, they talk about professionally. There are other people who use it kind of like Twitter, but that's the place where it still feels not wrong, but just different. It's okay, I get what you're trying to do here, but I don't know.
Yeah.
That kind of just the spicy and hot takes kind of thing. It feels more properly embedded on Twitter than LinkedIn.
Yes, I feel LinkedIn. I think partially because of the structure, it is more of a long form content platform, and it feels more buttoned up. It feels like I have to be more professional on LinkedIn than I do on Twitter.
Exactly. Yeah. You can kind of just let loose and just be yourself on Twitter.
Right.
Well, so I would love to talk to you about developer experience. And, as I think about that term, I've seen it defined in so many ways. People talk about it's about tooling, it's about process, it's about culture, it's about happiness, it's about developer productivity. Can you help us nail it down? What does the term developer experience mean for you?
It's so funny to me because developer experience is following the pattern of DevOps in that it's this sort of all-encompassing umbrella term to describe a lot of different things. Everything you just said is correct. All of that is developer experience. And yet when we try and define developer experience, it's okay, what does that actually mean? So I'm having a little bit of deja vu as far as defining these industry terms. I think for me, there are 2 sides to developer experience. One is more internally focused and one is more externally focused. And when you think about internal developer experience, this is especially important for things like developer tools. It makes sense to me that if you are building a developer tool, you would also utilize that tool. I'm not a fan of the term dog fooding for whatever reason, but there it is. And you should be utilizing the things you build because you are that sort of initial testing force. As far as external, I think it's really important for companies to understand that, especially for developers who are inundated with decisions, in their day-to-day work. What tool to use, what methodology to use, when to communicate, when to make decisions, what do we move left, what do we leave in this correct form, how do I actually integrate all of this teamwork into a single cohesive service, product, application, whatever. When you are inundated with that many decisions on an everyday basis, you have what's called decision fatigue. And we know that when you ask humans to make dozens and dozens of decisions, their efficacy at decision making actually lowers throughout that process. And when you think about developer experience, it's multifaceted, right? You are, one, trying to eliminate certain decisions by being opinionated. And I think this is where companies get a little shy occasionally, because, you want to make sure that your product can be utilized by multiple different types of people and for multiple use cases. All of that is great. But what I find is that people are actually really hungry for what a company's thoughts are and direction and sort of strategy around a product, how they would utilize it or do utilize this product that they're talking about. And those opinions aren't a bad thing. It's not blocking or gatekeeping customers from utilizing it in a different way. It's simply being opinionated about, hey, this is how we would go about this. This is how we utilize the product. That creates great developer experience because it eliminates those decisions and it helps people kind of streamline their use cases and how they approach something. So there's that, but also just making it joyful. The capitalists in the world always, they're like, what is this joy you speak of?
Right.
I believe happy developers are better developers. I do. We're more creative. We're more relaxed. We work more efficiently, better together when we are less stressed and we feel like we are actually contributing to something and having joy throughout our workday is important. The more that your product can inject that joy into a developer's life, the better that experience will be, and ultimately the better loyalty you will actually achieve as people use those products.
Something I find interesting about that topic around joy is I think it applies for both the internal and external developer experience, right? For the external developer experience, I'm thinking about like cases here like, Stripe or Shopify, where they have phenomenal documentation experiences, API experiences, paved roads that you can follow, you can drop in tokens and just get started. But for internal developers as well, where it's if you're the internal tooling that you're building, if it's easy to set up your development environment, if you don't have to think and spend 2 days to get your connection to the Kubernetes cluster to work, right, that joy just lets you move faster.
Flow. Yes, absolutely. You actually get into your work and that flow quicker. I completely agree.
So this doesn't sound like a weird question, but like, so what? Like, developers are happier. Like, the capitalist means like, big deal. Who cares about the happiness? Right. Like, why should organizations actually care about developer experience?
Right. I love that question. I think it's twofold. One, I do think that the productivity of a developer can be measured in that experience. And I want to be careful here because I think sometimes we overlay developer experiences only about developer productivity, and whereas that is a benefit, for me, it is not the only benefit. But when you remove those decisions, you're speeding up work. When you make onboarding faster, you're speeding up work. I mean, you brought up Stripe. Their documentation is some of the best documentation in the industry because you put in their use cases, right? It's not, okay, well, this is how to, step by step go through this one thing. It's like, okay, you want to do X, Y, and Z. This is how you actually go about it. And like you said, including those tokens so that people can actually test it within that documentation is brilliant. And it makes things so clear. But I think they were the first to really go for that use case approach to documentation, which I love. But I think so you're making the development experience more efficient. But again, I feel like so much of this toil that we've begun to remove from developers' plates, this, what we would call undifferentiated heavy lifting, not only about the decisions, but actually the work of it. The more that these tools with great developer experience eliminate that, again, you're looking at a speed up, and the faster that your development teams are operating and actually achieving your business outcomes, the more efficient it's going to be and the more money or profit or revenue you're going to actually make.
I love that. It's directly tying kind of like that developer happiness to productivity, to more efficiency, to more competitiveness as a business.
Definitely. And nothing will slow anyone down more than an irritated, pedantic developer. I mean, we can really dig in.
Yeah.
So
They get grumpy on Slack and they just start,
Right.
yeah.
it's
So
so true.
I can imagine there are developers out there in the audience right now who are like vigorously head nodding. They're like saying, yes, like, man, I want to improve the developer experience at my company, right? What are some practical ways that those folks can advocate for those changes with leadership?
Oof. I think arguing, anytime you are trying to persuade an audience, you have to look at what that group of humans is concerned with or what they want to achieve. And so my argument around developer experience, or my persuasive monologue around developer experience to an executive who is not necessarily technical, is going to be kind of different from someone who is closer to the keyboard, someone like a lead engineer or something like that. I think when you're speaking to people who are concerned about that bottom line and making sure that the business operates, you should approach it through this developer productivity approach. We will move faster. We will have less meetings. We will have, better decision making, more, I guess, faster iterations. That's all going to save money and then ultimately make you more money. If you're talking to someone who understands the difficulty and the day-to-day experience of being a developer, one, I hope it would be an easier argument. But two, I think just speaking to them like a human, like I think we all want to enjoy our jobs. I don't understand why we have split out so strongly our desire to enjoy our lives and have happiness and appreciate the people around us from what we consider to be professional sort of work habits. Humans are humans. We have basic needs. We have basic wants. And I hope that as we form a more efficient society and we're able to operate in a more streamlined way through things like developer experience, that we integrate that more, right? We should be making time for that. We should be making work joyful if we can. If joy does not stop profit, why would we limit it?
Right. I guess another way of phrasing it is like, what's this all for? Like, we're not just causing the machine there to help generate profits. Like, as humans, we back to like Maslow's hierarchy, he's like, we want to be able to get some joy out of what we're doing day to day. I'm actually thinking about studies where like there's a certain amount of like, you can increase somebody's comp, but if they're unhappy, they're still not going to stay. And the same kind of idea, like it's not just a money thing. It's also about like, are you getting satisfaction out of your day-to-day work?
Yes. I mean, people, it's interesting. I think they did a study and I might have been argued against. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But this concept of I think the number was like 70,000 or something. This is old data. We can find this
before all the inflation, went on, right?
Oh Lord, for eggs turned into $1 a piece. It's like, talk about a golden goose. I think, when we're talking about all of this, there is a diminishing return for compensation. Now, that's not to say that people can get away with paying below market value, right? Like we are an incredibly influential workforce. Developers command a certain compensation rating for a good reason, right? That said, the joy and experience of a job, as you said, goes way beyond just the money. We want to actually feel like we are contributing. I would say the vast majority of people want to feel like they are contributing to a better future, to a better world, to, easing someone's burdens, whatever that kind of mission is. And I think for all of it, it's going to have a little bit different flavor. But we want to feel like our life, our work mattered. We spend a third of our lives working. I want at the end of that to think or believe that I made some sort of impact. Not just about the impact of my bank account, but the impact that I had on helping others. That's important to me. And I don't think I'm alone in that.
That's great. Yeah. Especially, I don't know, as I get older personally, I look back and I think about early in my career, like, what have I done? What is my mark on the world? Like, what's the legacy that's left behind?
Right. Exactly. Legacy. I think, yeah. And I find maybe it is like my age at this point, but I have been thinking more about like, okay, how do I align my life, including work, more to my principles, my values, the things that I care about. And all of that leads ultimately into legacy.
So even though, capitalists be damned, it's all about joy, right? There is an investment that is required by a company to allow for good developer experience to occur. I'll observe that right now, kind of across the tech industry, we're sort of in leaner times, right? There are tighter budgets. Organizations are significantly more focused on particular activities. So how should organizations think about that balance of investment in developer experience versus sort of other, activities that can go on within their product development groups?
It's such a good question. Yeah, my favorite phrase from this year and I guess late last year is macroeconomic conditions. It's like we can't say the R word, recession. I think we're leaner, right? And we have seen a pattern across the industry. Dora has great metrics on this, and they just released another report. But around the habits and behaviors that people lean back into when they feel constrained, nervous, unsure of the future. And I think a lot of us are here. And so my observation is people fall back into what they're comfortable with in these moments of uncertainty and fewer resources. Many teams are operating with fewer people or smaller budgets. Being cognizant that doesn't erode the approaches and the work that you have put into things like developer experience, things like DevOps, this sort of continuous deployment, continuous integration. It is really, really important that we do not erode that value and all of that work in this process. But I find that a lot of people are leaning back, right? They're deploying less frequently. They're, looking for more things like governance and approvals. We're becoming more formalized. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a decision. And I find that people often will do things without reflecting on the pros and cons or the consequences of those decisions. So as long as you are doing that and recognizing that, okay, if we're going to continue shipping this product and avoid writing tests or avoid dealing with some of this technical debt just for the speed because we have fewer resources, that's fine. But at some point, you're going to have to pay for that and to make it right if you're not integrating it into your everyday workflow. So these are just like the pros and cons and the decisions we have to make. But I don't want someone to just go ahead and kind of slow down or become more of a traditional approach. We've made so much progress in bringing folks together and really kind of creating a flow within engineering teams for shipping software. The worst thing we could do in this moment is kind of settle back into old habits.
Definitely. I think that's an important point you called out also. Like, we can make changes, but we should be explicit about the impact of those changes. So I think not writing tests at all is batshit. But like, if you did decide to do that, being explicit about like, well, what's the impact that we're going to have as a result of that?
Exactly. And make a plan for it, at some point. We all cut corners with deadlines or constraints. Like, people are not alone in these decisions, but there is a cost to things like that. And knowing what it is and that you have a plan to fix it in the future is super important.
So there is, still this investment to be made. And for the organizations that want to make that investment, can you share any practical steps or practical tips for how companies can think about how to start improving their own developer experience?
I think speaking to and believing technical audiences. I think so often companies want data, and that's great. We love quantitative data. I think when we talk about data, we also forget that qualitative data is also data. Now, my my degree was in political science, so I'm in the sort of fake sciences, right? The social sciences, and so I care a lot more about qualitative data than I guess a chemist would. But when you're thinking about it, you have incredible resources in an engineering team. When you employ developers, talk to them, ask them questions, and listen. What are the hiccups in their daily existence? There's this saying, I don't know where it came from, but it's, if someone tells you have a tail, ignore them. If 100 people tell you you have a tail, look behind you. And I love that because, sometimes it's just people have a complaint and it's unique to them, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it's not valuable, but, when you're prioritizing shifting and solving some of these problems for developer experience, you're looking for those big wins. If 12 developers all say the same thing, that's something you should pay attention to. And these are often really simple. Like the first thing you can do, I think, for developer experience is really back to the basics of DevOps. What are the approvals you're asking people to do? What are the slowdowns? Like if someone has to do something that's lengthy to run a test or to actually, move something further into a different environment, whatever it is, making sure that that process is as efficient as possible and that the process is necessary, right? Eliminating things that don't actually matter will make a huge impact in that. Obviously, don't get rid of like basic things like security and governance if we really need them. But if they're not actually affecting anything, why are we going through this sort of act of security, compliance, and governance? Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Like it sounds what you're talking about is reducing toil, right? Like finding
Absolutely.
the things that are causing pain and friction and just militantly getting rid of them.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. And then secondly, I think ensuring that your technical employees are involved in purchasing decisions. We know already that developers do influence purchasing decisions, but ensuring that they are part of the process, including kind of seeking out new tools, testing new tools. I find a lot of companies are kind of hesitant to actually spend time on a proof of concept or kind of testing out different vendors. I think it is well worth the money to test out various things before going all in on something based on their word or their demos. Really making sure that something can work for your specific existing code, team, your constraints and resources. That's super important. It's worth the investment. But, ensuring that developers are part of the process is really critical, and not just going with, whomever you already have a license with or the fastest kind of business approach to it.
Right. Again, going back to, it sounds like being explicit. What are the metrics we're trying to optimize for? What's this project that we're doing? And then evaluating, maybe the best vendor for that.
Yes, absolutely. I've also seen, I'm curious if you've seen this too, this year particularly, I think people are struggling to make some goals and then hold those goals. I think because the market is so fluid and there's a lot of changing elements to everything that's happening right now in the world, we're kind of like shifting, we're pivoting goals a little bit more frequently. And I wonder if that's sort of an impact of just that, so sort of macroeconomic conditions. But I'm curious if you've heard anything around that.
I mean, I've just the data, kind of from running ops level. I'd be lying if I said there were no customers that said, "Hey, we don't have budget or our priorities just changed." Right? And definitely, we're part of this market and part of those macroeconomic conditions as well.
Definitely, yeah.
I guess kind of the counter question, right? What are some mistakes you've seen companies make when they first start investing in developer experience?
My answer to this is always boil the ocean. And this is universal to change. Changes for me should be incremental and relatively small to start. So when you actually look at the whole and you find the places where you can make the most impact and have the most benefit, choose that one thing. Do that one thing. make that one change and then go from there. I think sometimes we approach things in this sort of, oh, we're going to rewrite it all. No, we're not going to rewrite it all. That's a terrible idea. We can rewrite this specific service. We can rewrite this specific class. But rewriting the entire application would be nuts. Same thing, right? You have to look at these pieces, what we were just talking about. If you're removing toil and you're looking at what causes the most time delays, frustration, conflict between team members, those are the places you actually want to target and really make a difference in that. But going slow. And I know it doesn't feel as satisfying when you're in it, but it works the best. And it also means that you can kind of pivot or change your approach if you find that it's not beneficial.
I love that. Yeah. When I think about our own customers, right, for context, at Ops Level, one of the capabilities of our product is with this notion of maturity. We can measure how well built your software is across a variety of dimensions. And the customers that are most successful do what you're suggesting. They're going to pick one thing to try to move the needle on first. We want to improve reliability. We want to improve security. We want to improve performance. And right. Customers that are like, we want it all, take it one step at a time. Get one win first before you go, sweep the series.
It's so true. And you can see this over and over and over again. Small incremental change. It's less risky and it just works better long term.
So, okay, developer experience then, let's admit it's this great thing, right? Organizations are investing in it. We're going to make developers happy, something. We make more money. So the capitalists are okay with that. But how do we actually quantify some of this? Like, what are some ways that organizations should start thinking about measuring developer experience and the investments that they're making?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I think one, going back to this joy moment, and again, the capitalists in the audience are going to be irritated with me, and that's okay. Measuring the satisfaction of your employees, specifically your developers. If you're making these changes for developer experience, ensuring that they're actually moving the needle as far as people feeling happy in their job, if they're feeling effective, if these kinds of things that weigh them down and frustrate them are being reduced, that's a super valuable piece of information. So the first thing is just kind of measuring what your employees actually think. And of course, I would do some kind of baseline ahead of time. My rule with surveys always, I don't care what the survey is about, accepting anonymous feedback is super important. I'm known for being a loudmouth. And I'm comfortable, in my approach to life is I don't say, if I'm going to say something, I'm going to say it with my whole chest. But not everyone has that. And not everyone should be forced to participate in that way. And so allowing people to have the space and safety of speaking their truth anonymously is super important. So a survey, I think then you're looking at your basic metrics of efficiency and effectiveness, right? If you're making a change around developer experience, does that speed up your time to deployment? Does that speed up, your time from actually discussing a feature to when it's in production? Whatever your metrics are now, I wouldn't necessarily add more or change them completely. I think it's really about, does this change to developer experience and this commitment to making development work better, faster, more enjoyable, is that correlated to an improvement in our existing metrics?
Got it. And in terms of, so there's on the joy measurement side, be qualitative and anonymous, allow for anonymous feedback and surveys to make sure you're getting the report fidelity. And then for the quantitative part, you talked about time deployment and lead time. That sounds like parts of the DORA metrics.
Very much so.
Are those the metrics that teams should be using, or are there other metrics that folks should be considering as well?
I'm preferable to those metrics. I think they've been around for long enough. We know they work. The theories have been tested in practice. And we also have great data around that, thanks to places like DORA, to connect those metrics to what we consider to be, as you said, these sort of mature and super efficient companies. We know that they are, quote unquote, better at shipping software that is of high quality and reliable. And so I wouldn't move the cheese in that way. I think those metrics are standard for a reason. I think they're really solid.
Yeah, I have a degree in computer science, which is another kind of fake science. But what I love about Dora is that it's rooted in real science, right? Like it's actually scientific in their approach. They perform measurement, they evaluate companies, they show the kind of outputs that these companies are having, and they've done this. I forgot now how long the Dora reports have been out, but 2014, 2015, like it's been years of
Yeah,
just year after year showing the same results over and over again.
definitely. And you know that this works at scale. That works for a company of 5 people as much as it does your largest airline, your largest
Yeah.
bank.
Well, it came out of what's the company? Goggle or something like Google. Google. That's the
I don't know. Let me bang it. Hang on one second.
yeah. Yes. Does Amazon have a search engine? Maybe. Um, there's this there's this report right now written by McKinsey, and they're currently getting kind of dunked on a little bit on the internet. The expression "never try not to be that person on the internet," and they're it right now for writing this report titled "Yes, you can measure software developer productivity." So, what are your thoughts on that as a statement, or if you've read the article, your thoughts on the article?
I think my first sort of question when I saw this hubbub is around if someone else stated this, if someone we respect from a technology standpoint stated this, would we be having the same response? Or is part of the response simply that it came from McKinsey? I think we can't sort of unlink that bias. We also have to remember that McKinsey, their bread and butter is really executives. And a lot of times executives are not technical. They don't come from a technical background. I talk about this a lot in that I think it is critical and really important that technical people move into non-technical roles in a company, that they move into leadership, that they start thinking about executive decision-making and executive roles. I believe the sort of age of the Wharton MBA is coming to an end for tech companies. We need to be able to step into these roles and lead these companies because we have a unique understanding of our industry and how, the constraints of technologies, right? So all that said, I think you can measure developer productivity. I think you should measure developer productivity. I think where it becomes perverted and unhealthy is when you look at it from a stance of, okay, well, this person is, you're like stack ranking people and then deciding who isn't valuable. I think the measures that they mentioned don't include things that, even as an industry, we struggle to measure, which is like this glue work, the work that makes a team operate fully functionally. So part of that, what do you think about the article?
It's sort of a similar take. I thought that the article, it was very reductionist. It was like, it's measuring software development productivity with the assumption that you have this set of individual developers that are like these unit automatons. And so if you just add more of those, you'll produce more software fast, just like Pokemon. Collect all the smart people and put them in the room. You'll have more software. But that's not how we know software teams work, right? It's through collaboration. It's through that glue work. There was an article I read this week around the best developer that they know. I'm blanking on the person's name, but it was basically, they write very little code because what they do as a senior engineer is they work with other people. There's a lot of training and mentorship and coaching that goes on. So they're raising the bar across the software stack. But if I look at any kind of classical metric of individual productivity, I don't know, lines of code created, this person probably deleted a bunch of code, which is actually a positive thing. It's kind of missing that point and forest from the trees. It's not just about having individuals working independently. It's about a team effort. And I think that the article kind of missed that piece.
Definitely. And I think part of that is because I'm assuming, and I might be wrong, but I am assuming the author of this article or the authors are coming at it from the approach of a consultant. They're not coming at it from the approach of, what it's actually like to be a committing engineer on a development team with all of those constraints, which that just makes sense. You can't know what you can't know.
Exactly.
Definitely. It does mention, generative AI and how these tools will change development in the future. I think this is a really interesting topic right now because you can approach it one of two ways. I think in some ways people feel threatened by this kind of new approach. But I take a totally different approach to generative AI. I'm really excited about it because I believe it will reduce some of this toil that we're talking about. I think it will increase developer productivity, and not in a way that people should then get rid of developers. That's not the point of this. The point of it is around increasing the efficiency and the effectiveness of development teams, and making sure that they're not, necessarily writing the code verbatim, but they're really thinking about how would we solve this problem from a technical perspective? How are we going to architect this? What are we asking from a prompt engineering approach to it? I don't think it gets rid of developers. It changes our approach and the most valuable part of our skill set.
Yeah, I think a lot of developers take pride on like the nitty gritty parts of the craft, where it's like, I wrote this super efficient function, right?
Right.
And I think it's much more about, well, think in broader strokes, right? You're going to have to assemble the system together. And maybe there absolutely is still going to be opportunities for that kind of like micro level optimization, but that's probably already been done by some other human, and the AI has kind of captured that in its scraping of the internet and its model, and rests on that. In fact, your code will probably be better because it's using kind of the best in class forms of like the details in the small.
Definitely. And my one little asterisk to that, this is now the symbol for asterisk. I think you have to also recognize that a tool like that gathers information across and then determines, okay, we believe this to be the most effective approach, might not be the right approach. So I think we also have to have standards around understanding our value add, understanding our sort of position, and as you say, these broad strokes, and recognizing that the human approach will still always be the most creative. And occasionally I am expecting that we will need to move beyond the recommendations and actually dive into something. And so we don't want to lose those skill sets, but kind of approaching it from a perspective of, this is exciting. This kind of removes a lot of the most boring parts of our job. Like if I never made a form ever again, I'd be a happier person. I don't want to do that.
Right.
And that's something that these tools can do really well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you bring up a good point also, just kind of like the bias that can exist in all these engines depending on the data that they've collected. And so, are they skewing towards a solution that's good in general in the average case, but maybe not for your specific case, where, yeah, human brain is going to be good to decipher that.
Definitely. Yes. And you touched on it, but having responsible AI and approaching this, understanding the ethical considerations around this is important, and we should all educate ourselves around those topics.
You've talked about the importance of kind of tooling automation in the past, right, around enhancing developer experience. What are some of the must-have tools that you would recommend, for a DevOps environment?
That's such a great question. I am not someone who ever recommends like specific tools, because I want people to, as I said earlier, consider their use case and consider their constraints as well as the consequences of something. So for example, like across the SDLC, you're going to want different things. And depending on what technology you're using, obviously you're going to need specific tools. Within those categories of tools, there are a lot of great options. Like we are not limited by crappy software at this point. We're doing pretty great. Turns out we're good at this. I think when it comes down to it, you're looking for a few things. So for when I'm evaluating a tool for developer experience, I'm looking for an easy, straightforward onboarding experience. So before you ever decide on a tool, try it out. Do that proof of concept. Try and actually implement something, and implement something real world, right? A lot of times the demos, and I'm guilty of this in developer relations, right? We get up there and do these flashy demos, and they're super fun and look really exciting. But sometimes it's not exactly what you need done, or it doesn't pull the pieces together in a certain way. So pull that off, right? Actually try and, dedicate a few days, if not a week, to really looking at how that can assist you. So great documentation, easier onboarding. I think understanding how a tool fits into the ecosystem is also really important. So I don't know of a single tool people really utilize in any application that's more than one developer who doesn't have some kind of integration need. So is that tool going to integrate with the tools you have already bought into, you have already utilized? And not just integrated in a clunky way that you're going to have to write and do all this weird stuff with, but like is a smooth integration. That becomes more of a decision-making process when you're buying from a vendor who offers multiple services. Obviously, native integration might be a smoother process, but making sure that is something that can be pulled together pretty quickly and efficiently. And then finally, I look for abstraction walls. I have utilized tools in the past that are great for the first 40% of what I'm trying to do. And then I hit a wall. And a lot of times, most development tools, we are lucky that you can actually dive in and kind of see the code. But at some point, you can hit this wall, and then it really slows you down. Like you're moving into a more of a manual process. The fewer abstraction walls a tool has, for me, long term, the better off you're going to be. And so just because something's easy to onboard and get into, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right tool, because if a year from now you're going to run into something and not be able to fix it, except to rewrite something or buy something, some other tool, that's not valuable from a developer experience anyway. Sure, you sped things up for that year, but not over the long term. So just being aware of all those things and going from there. And then finally, again, these constraints. I talk about constraints a ton, but like if you are an airline, your security constraints are going to be radically different than if I sell shoes on the internet, right? And so being aware of, when you purchase from a vendor, or you code something yourself, understanding that the priorities of your business and the specific needs of your applications are met by these tools.
That's great. I have two final questions. So the first one is, as we talked about, DevOps in the past, we talked about this idea of shifting left, right? Consolidating responsibilities, and developers now have to know more. It's not that they just write code anymore. They need to know about observability and metrics and tooling and logging and tracing and security and DevSecOps even. We've shifted so much left. How do you think about it in the context of developer experience? Like how can a good developer experience help ease that burden of like just so much more to know?
Oof. That's a tough one. Because abstractions are something we have all agreed on that we need, and it does reduce those decisions. I think recognizing also in that we are losing some level of autonomy, visibility, whatever, flavor you want to put on top of it. But there is a bit of a sacrifice in an abstraction. You are trusting that this other thing is going to do what you need to do and to do so well. That doesn't mean we should never do abstractions. Like this is an important part of it. But again, you're just kind of keeping it in your mind. I think understanding also, there's this pressure in tech, I think, to be an expert at everything. I've never understood this. It makes no sense to me. I can't be an expert in everything. I'm going to choose my handful of things that I consider myself to be really talented in. I love being a generalist and knowing a little bit about a lot. But I also know where my skill set ends or my knowledge ends, and being able to quickly and efficiently and clearly communicate with others and ensure that you are able to leverage their knowledge and their skill set is critical to this whole thing. So going back to this glue work and this team, you are not a developer in isolation. The 10x developer nonsense, like let's leave this behind us and move forward in a place where we realize that we need each other. We need our skill sets to buttress each other. My weaknesses are going to be unique, and I need other people's strengths to kind of, prop those up where I lend the same strength to someone else's weakness.
It sounds like a lot of what you're describing is this idea of the T-shaped developer that is kind of broad, but really deep, or maybe the pi or M, like broad broad across the board and deep in a few areas. Yes,
I think I agree with that for sure.
You wrote a book, right? 97 Things Every Cloud Engineer Should Know. And it's a wonderful collection of a variety of topics written by different authors.
Yeah.
Do you have which one of those was your favorite?
That's a terrible question. I can't choose a favorite. My favorite thing about that book is that Nathan and I had the chance to actually curate articles from a bunch of different people. And going back to this, I'm not a developer in isolation. That book is such a great example of the fact that we have so much knowledge and so many resources within the industry that you don't have to know it all. That you have people who are willing and excited to teach others, to share their information. I think we've all kind of discovered little things across our career path, and sharing that is really important. And along those lines, encouraging others to share what they've learned, even if it feels silly. I think a lot of times people get in early in their career in tech and they'll make some kind of discovery, or they'll figure out how to solve something with code or whatever. And they're excited, but they feel like, oh, I couldn't write a blog about this because it's so silly, or, this won't be meaningful to someone else. I disagree with that so strongly. I think we all come to things with a unique point of view, a unique set of skills and experiences, and being sure to learn those lessons publicly if you're comfortable. I think that's what makes this industry's community really special. So my whole sort of approach to the 97 Things was just a deep appreciation for everyone who was willing to contribute and to share their lessons learned.
Amazing. Well, Emily, before we wrap up, I always like to ask guests, what is your favorite music to kind of work to?
Oh, I have a weird answer to this. I like music. I listen to a lot of EDM. But as far as like working, this isn't popular, but I watch old like TV shows or old movies. So I'll put something like The West Wing in the background, or I was just recently rewatching this awful show from the early aughts called Moonlight. And I will put that on and kind of write or do my work from there. I know that's not typical because a lot of people can't work to conversation, but for whatever reason, my brain really enjoys that sort of background noise.
Awesome. Normally, I know I'm one of the people that can't work to conversation. Normally, I'll tell guys, I should try that. I don't think I'm going to put on Moonlight in my own background because I'm totally maybe I'll watch the show or something. But cool. So, and also, Emily, what is the best way for people to follow you on social media?
Again, I'm back on Twitter, so I'm editing Emily there. If you're not on Twitter for whatever reason, that's okay. I am on Blue Sky as Emily Freeman. So those are probably the best two spots to find me.
Awesome. Well, we are going to put links to both of those in the show description below, and everyone feel free to follow Emily on both Twitter or X or Blue Sky. And today we talked about all things developer experience. We talked about how to get started with it, why it's important, how to invest in it, topics also around DevOps and developer experience. So Emily, it has been so great having you on the episode, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's been a pleasure being here.
Great. And to our listeners, thank you again to everyone for making it through to the end of another episode. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to see on the show, send us an email at levelup@opslevel.com. We will see everybody next time. Happy building.